All right, it's 1:45. Thank you very much once again, everyone. Welcome to San Francisco. For those who are not from San Francisco, we are based in Singapore. We are from the APEC Secretariat, and we're so happy to be part of this APEC Economic Leaders Week in San Francisco. And the city is beautiful and has been very welcoming to all of us. So once again, thank you so much. And today we're going to have this news briefing. Actually, we're going to launch an annual report from the APEC Policy Support Unit. So the APEC Policy Support Unit is a research and analysis arm of APEC. We're based in Singapore, and right here we have the director of the Policy Support Unit, Mr. Carlos Kuriyama. I'm going to read his profile for a while. His profile is quite impressive. Thank you, Carlos, for being here. So, Carlos Kuriyama is actually appointed as a Policy Support Unit Director last year at the APEC Economic Leaders Week in Thailand 2022. He is Peruvian with a long track record, including he was the former chief trade negotiator and high-level advisor in Peru's Ministry of Foreign Trade and Tourism. And since 2009, Carlos Kuriyama has been serving as a senior analyst within the Policy Support Unit, focusing on trade and investment liberalization, as well as regulatory and structural reform. He also works on the development of one interesting piece of work that we always are very proud to announce. It's called the APEC Women and the Economy Dashboard. Those reports and, of course, the research and economic outlook from the Policy Support Unit supports member economies' efforts to advance women's economic empowerment in the region. So today's briefing will highlight what we called APEC Regional Trends Analysis. You have some of the handout. Some of you might not have it, but don't worry. We'll provide a link to the report right after this. It will be uploaded on the APEC website. Thank you very much for that. So the report, or what we abbreviate as ARTA, APEC loves abbreviations. It is actually will provide you the findings on the direction of the APEC region's trade and growth, economic growth, of course, and policy priorities for building economic inclusion and sustainability, both in the United States and around Asia Pacific. It will help set the tone for APEC ministerial meeting, which will be held here in San Francisco on 14 and 15 November 2023. This briefing also hopefully will provide insights on the outlook for trade and as well for the APEC region, of course, which accounts for half of the world trade and 60% of GDP growth. So without further ado, I hand the floor to Carlos Kuriyama. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masyitha, for your kind introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in San Francisco and have this opportunity to present with you the findings of this latest edition of the APEC Regional Trends Analysis. So if we all go to slide number 3 of the key points, well, our most recent analysis show 4 main points. The first one is that the APEC economic growth is getting more stable than in previous years, but we can see that economic growth has improved, but we are facing some downside risks, and there are some uncertainties that may be prevailing. Also, the second point is that inflation has remained elevated, even though it's much lower than last year, but this is mainly because of supply chain factors, and this is also because of an exacerbation of some weather-related issues. The third point is that geoeconomic fragmentation and trade protectionism they are definitely a threat to the future of trade. And the final point is that over a long term, we need to look at demographics, because this is starting to have certain influence on how much we can grow. So we have a growing elderly population in the Asia-Pacific region, and this is presenting challenges for healthcare systems, for labor markets, and social support network. If we go to the next slide on GDP growth, we can see that the GDP growth was higher at 3.3% in the first half of 2023 from 2.9% a year ago, the first half of 2022. So this is explained in part because of the rebounding tourism and also more domestic consumption. This is driving the economic activity in the APEC region. However, growth is uneven across the region. So in the next slide about the GDP growth, the outlook, we can see that for this year, the APEC region is expected to grow in around 3.3% for the whole year. But there are some downside risks. For example, we have the issue of the inflation that has been kind of stubborn, also higher level debts, trade protectionism, climate change issues, geopolitical tensions, and geoeconomic fragmentations that are casting shadows over APEC prospects. We have also some upside opportunities for growth. So from domestic consumption, tourism, and also continued targeted fiscal support. So from 2024 and in the medium term, I would say that growth in APEC will stabilize to a range of 2.8 to 2.9% annually. And however, what we notice is that this uncertainty on the economic landscape is complicating efforts towards a firmer post-pandemic recovery. If we look at the next slide on monetary policy rates and average inflation, we notice that there has been an uptick in inflation from August this year at 3.4%. And this is particularly due to higher prices for some commodities like oil and also some food products like sugar, rice, sorghum, and corn. And despite these recent developments, we can see that inflation in September 2023 was much lower than inflation in September 2022. So in general, to fight inflation, many APEC economies have been tightening monetary policy by raising interest rates. And compared to the levels at the end of 2022, we can see that interest rates went up between 0.25 to 1.25% percentage points in most APEC economies. But we have some few economies that have opted to reduce monetary policy rates to boost economic activity, because the issue about higher interest rates is that could slow down economic activity. The next slide is about oil prices, energy prices, food prices. In the case of oil, the price of oil has been around in recent days like 5% higher in comparison to a year ago. And this has been because of oil production cuts by the OPEC plus members that have played a role. And also there's an increase in demand for oil. But also in the case of food crops, so weather conditions due to El Nino has been disrupting the supply chain of food. Also, we have had some export restrictions in some important non-APEC economies. And also we have disruptions in the fertilizer supply chain. All of this has affected food production, and therefore the prices are going up a bit. So one example, if you go to the next slide, is about rice prices. So rice prices jumped from, I would say, between 37 to 51%, depending on the type of rice variety. And we have a large non-APEC economy, which is an important rice producer, that has imposed export bans on rice recently. And this action, added to the weather conditions I mentioned and the disruptions in fertilizer supply chains, are causing this spike on rice prices. The next slide shows a trade, basically. What happened with trade? So in the case of merchandise trade, it contracted on the first half of 2023, with the volume and value of exports declining year on year by 3.0 and 6.5% respectively. But imports decreased more. Actually, it was 3.5% in the case of volume and 7.1% in the case of value during the same period. So macroeconomic conditions have increased the cost of trade finance. And also we have this prevailing uncertainties that I explained before that in this global environment that have been affecting trade. The next slide shows what has happened in trade in commercial services. And the latest data available is from the first quarter of 2023 that shows that trade in commercial services has been at higher rates, but they are decelerating. We have had, I would say, a robust expansion on travel services, but it has been offset by a slowdown on transportation services and good-related services. The next slide shows the outlook for trade. So for 2024 and subsequent years, we are expecting a more optimistic trade outlook in the APEC region. And so I think we are going to expect a more stable economic growth rates, and this is also influencing on trade. But my concern is that the risk of the economic fragmentation may slow these rates down. You can see also in the next slide the concerns that we have in terms of trade protectionism. So there has been an increase in trade restrictive measures, in the accumulation of trade restrictive measures, and also trade remedies. And we are noticing some signs that these measures could be affecting supply chains. For example, the proportion of intermediate goods in international trade has fallen from 51% to 48.5% during the first half of 2023. This is based on WTO data. And also looking ahead, I think we need to look at the shifting demographics. This is a critical concern with potential costs to the APEC region. So this is the next slide. And so we can see that there's a growing elderly population. The percentage of population in APEC ages 65 and above has almost twofold, in 3 decades. And so the sharper increase has been seen in Northeast Asia. And also adding to this, the share of the young population, ages 0 to 14 years old, declining APEC during the same period from 28% to 19%. So this demographic shift is presenting several challenges, right? Over the long term, we have an aging population, which means that we need to have a higher expenditure on healthcare, pensions, social security costs. Also, there's a shrinking workforce that this can lead to labor shortages, also economic stagnation, and at the same time, we have lower rates. So in this context, the proportion of individuals in the working age will fall in the future, and these individuals will have to face a greater burden supporting a growing elderly population. So that's something that could, I would say, slow down growth in the years to come. So what we need to do, I would say, to conclude, we need a balanced mix of government policies. This is very important, and we need multilateral cooperation in order to move forward. So we need a transparent monetary policy. So we need timely communication to manage expectations. Also, we need a targeted fiscal policy. So we need fiscal management in a very prudent way. But we also need to rebuild fiscal buffers because governments have spent too much because of the pandemic. And we need to protect the vulnerable. So we need to be we need to target, the populations that are mostly vulnerable. We also need to have a proactive approach to aging. We need to think about that. For example, in some Asian economies, ministries of education are already thinking about closing schools because there are not enough students in certain districts. And finally, what we need to do is to enhance regional cooperation. So we have global problems, therefore we need global solutions. And that's the key, the multilateral coordination for tackle trade protectionism, climate change issues, rising the green economy transition, and also supply chain risk disruptions. So I think I'll leave it here. I think I spoke too much, and I look forward to hear your questions, your comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for that insight on the region's outlook and economic outlook policies. And I think especially interesting on the demographic change. We think that in some of the APEC economies, they actually have a demographic benefit, or that some APEC economies have more younger population than others, but we can see that it is actually the other way around. I'm going to have now open the floor for any questions. If you have, yes, I can see you straight away. And I've got my friend Randy here running around for the microphone. Thank you very much. Please mention your name and your media outlet. And yes, please, thank you.
Hi, thank you. David Lauder with Reuters News Service in Washington, D.C. So I had a couple questions. On the growth outlook, GDP growth outlook, it drops off next year from this year, 3.3 to 2.8%. It looks like, or around that. So what is driving that? Is that largely the U.S. slowing down? What is China's component? What does it look like outside of those two big top two economies? And then also, you mentioned the risk of geopolitical fragmentation. Do you see that as driving this sort of maybe a bit of a decline after 24 in the trade volume growth? And what do you need to see from President Biden and President Xi at this meeting to try and prevent that? A lot of questions, sorry.
Thank you very much, David. For Reuters, I think I saw one here. I'm just going to collect. Yes, please. Here, in front here. Ren, thank you very much.
Here you go.
I'm Jim Herlihy. I'm with the San Francisco Experience podcast. Very quick question. Was any of your data able to show increased foreign direct investments in specific countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, specifically with regard to friendshoring policies? So increased FDI as a result of friendshoring policies during the 2022-2023 period.
Thank you very much, James. Carlos, can we take these two first?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would say the reason why for next year, right, the growth outlook is a little bit, the rates would be a little bit slower, is because the largest economies in APEC are not growing as it was initially expected. So there has been a revision on those figures. In the case of, for example, China, it has taken longer to recover from the pandemic. So their reopening also is taking place, but the economy has not recovered as initially expected. It's recovering, but it's taking probably a bit longer. And then in the case of other economies, the U.S., we have issues on concerns on inflation. Interest rates have been going up, and so that has affected. I would say for what we expect this year, I think in terms of U.S. and China, the dynamics, I think a stable relationship within U.S. and China is a win-win situation for everyone. I think these two APEC economies are the two largest economies in the world, and it makes a lot of sense for them to work together. And in fact, if we look at the trade flows between U.S. and China, I would say the latest numbers have been about $758 billion of trade in goods and services, right? And this is the highest level of trade in history between U.S. and China, and despite all this political rhetoric. So in reality, that's not coinciding with what is happening in reality, right? So it shows that how important it is to re-engage, de-risk, and avoid decoupling. So, and in terms of FDI, this is not in this report, but we have been looking at some of the data, and actually what we are noticing is that the share of FDI, the inward flows, right, the arriving to Asia, this share is growing in Southeast Asia and is diminishing in Northeast Asia, particularly China. We need to look at the nitty-gritty. some experts say, yeah, it's about decoupling or friendshoring or reshoring. But in my view, it's also about macroeconomics. In macroeconomics, what's happening? Basically, cost of living is increasing in China. The production costs are not as cheap as 10 years ago in China. And so many companies would like to keep comparative advantage and they are moving out somewhere else. So we noticed that 10, 15 years ago, yeah, everybody was talking about, oh, textiles, apparel, footwear. Where is it coming? It's coming from China. Now, where is it coming? It's coming from Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, or South Asia, like India, Bangladesh, among others. Yeah. Thanks.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Do you see this as a trend in future, and is it good?
It's a trend, and what firms will do is, what can we do to keep the comparative advantages? If the comparative advantages are on the cost side, so they will look where it's cheaper. If the advantages is where we can get the best quality resources, they will go where the best quality resources are. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Economies have to maintain their competitive advantage in that sense. Okay, one question from here. No? Yeah? Yes. Here first.
Then over there.
And then after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carlos. Xinhua News Agency of China. My question, actually, my colleague's question as well, is that on the one hand, you said APEC is to work toward anti-protectionism and to prevent further disruption of supply chain. But on the other hand, the United States is championing the APEC. So how do you balance between the overall APEC economies and seemingly strengthen a comparatively smaller circle of allies and partners? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I think the lady on the right side, thank you very much.
Hi, Yifan Yu with Nikkei Asia. I want to go back to the GDP growth slide. We can see, except the ongoing year, APEC growth is actually lag behind the rest of the world for past year and the years going forward. Could you explain why is that? And also my second question is, you mentioned the term geoeconomic fragmentation quite a lot in this presentation, but it's like quite a fancy term. Could you give us an example to explain to our readers what exactly is geoeconomic fragmentation and what's the reasons behind that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carlos, do you want to take that? Two questions first.
Yeah, so the first question was about supply chains and IPEF, what may happen. Well, IPEF is still under negotiation, so I would say it would be good to have a look at what are going to be the final text and see what IPEF will have in order to provide an opinion. So at this point, I would be prudent and wait what would be the final outcome for IPEF. But what I think it's important that anything what economists decide, they have to follow the principles of free and open trade. That's very important, and that would provide a win-win situation for everyone. And then about geoeconomic fragmentation, let me explain. For example, before the pandemic, many companies were having a just-in-time strategy of production in a way that they were sourcing parts and components from all over the world, most likely from the cheapest source that could provide the quality of the part components that they needed. But then things change, in part because of the pandemic, or sometimes because of some rhetoric, or because of some trade restrictive measures. And firms started to pursue a just-in-case approach in which they are sourcing from few places, most likely closer to where they are, and also they are starting to build redundancies. And so at the end, what is happening is that they are starting to shift a little bit trade, right, between partners. And so that's the economic fragmentation, because at the end, companies used to rely from the rest of the world based on the business model, but now the business model is shifting a bit to rely on few partners and let's say in the vicinity in general, right? That's yeah.
And I think the other question from Nikkei is about the GDP growth in the coming future is below
sorry.
the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, I think this is also because of the level of development of the APEC economy. So on average, the level of development in APEC is higher than in the rest of the world. So those that are that have, let's say, also higher income levels usually grow in percentage terms at lower rates. But if we monetize that in US dollars, millions of dollars is much more. Yeah, it's just that. Yeah.
Process. Thank you very much, Carlos. Do we have any more questions? Yes, please, gentlemen on that side. And then after that, I'm coming to you, Jose. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking my question. Ivan Pilchik of TESS News Agency. So, well, may I ask how much trade and growth outlook is specifically affected by the sanctions imposed by the US and its allies against Russia and against China? Thank you so much.
I don't have a number, but
Hi, my name is Jose Ricardo Bondoc with SF Newsfeed. In echoing the sentiment regarding the sanctions placed on China regarding Russia and China, how much would you say the human rights situation in the various APEC economies, including Burma, including China itself, how does that affect the economic growth within those countries?
Thank you very much for the questions. I think we just have to take a look at whether we have the numbers on, or we track those sanctions impact on, or maybe trade measures that is quite limiting in that sense.
we don't have the numbers. We haven't made estimations, but what is very clear is that any measure that is restricting trade, we have an impact on economic growth. Also, the other thing that I would say is that sometimes we have some geopolitical issues, conflicts, and those issues affect the economy. So it's a reality, and it's unfortunate, but they affect the economy.
And does it affect what we've done in APEC internally?
In terms of the
Discussions that we're having.
discussions in APEC, well, I would say in APEC, we try to put politics aside. We focus more on economic issues because that's where it's easier to get consensus. It's been not easy, I would say, but it's good that all 21 members are sitting all together in the same meeting room, and they are on speaking terms and trying to find commonalities to see what can be delivered.
And I think on Jose, if I can quickly just give context to that. As an economic forum, we tend to sort of look at economic growth at the same time. And like Carlos said, I think the geopolitical issues might affect the economic growth and even trade between economies. But we don't necessarily track that part on human development, especially when you say human rights in that sense. But do we have something about, like you said, Human Development Index, whether it's in terms of education, perhaps, that we can see, I think post-pandemic things have changed a little bit in that front.
Yeah, for example, the pandemic affected, I would say, had a big impact on development. And I think, for example, in some economies, in particular APEC developing economies, there will be, I would say, some educational gap, I would say even generational gap, in a way that some of those new generations, I mean, were directly affected by the pandemic and couldn't have access to proper education. Let me give you one example about my home economy in Peru. The pandemic struck the world, and the classes had to be switched to remote mode. But unfortunately in Peru, not every household had access to tablets, to computers, even smartphones. Some of them couldn't even have access to internet. It was impossible to meet in person because of the pandemic and the restrictions, lockdowns, or social distancing measures. And so at the end, what happened that about 100,000 kids, in school age, had to stop studying because they didn't have the means. So that's going to put them behind, and to catch up is going to be a big, big, big issue. Huh?
Yeah. Thanks. Do we have any other questions? We have room for one more. If that's okay, I'm just going to take that. Yes.
That's one more.
Almost at the countdown.
Hi,
Thanks, David. Yeah,
David
go
Lauder
ahead.
again with Reuters. Just on the geopolitical issue front, you mentioned you try to avoid to keep out of that, keep to economics, but is that getting harder and harder as trade restrictions are increasing, national security policies are increasing, that is it more difficult to kind of separate that geopolitical from the economics here? Thank you.
I would say, good question. I think the world is getting more globalized, and therefore we rely more from one another. And therefore, I mean, these geopolitical issues affect, the economy more than before. So it's difficult, of course, to discuss, but at the end, we try to keep discussing, ways how we can, improve, the people's life, through more free, more open trade, prevent supply chain disruptions, find ways to keep supply line open, among other things.
And I think because we just finished a meeting actually, and I wonder whether you've shared the same thing. We've heard about this from member economies around the room. They want the same thing, isn't it?
Exactly. So the discussions at the concluding senior official meeting were basically on these economic issues. It was about interconnectedness, inclusion. It was about innovation. Yeah, we didn't discuss geopolitical matters.
Not at all. So yeah. Somehow it works in APEC. Somehow. That's all. Thank you very much, everyone. And I really appreciate you coming here today. And hopefully in the coming days, we also will have more information for you. The report and the presentation and the news release will come to the APEC website. So just stay tuned. It will be in probably in 15 minutes, so you can access that. If you have any questions, please just send an email to media@apec.org. Thank you so much, Carlos, again, for
My
having
pleasure.
for being here.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen.